Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Win-Win, our third webinar on implementing faculty development using Teaching Physician, particularly for the ABFM Performance Improvement Continuing Credit. My name is Brian Hischier. I'm STFM's Manager of Online Education, and I help run Teaching Physician. And I am joined here today by Amanda Kost, our editor.
Thanks. I see we have some attendees trickling in, so we might give people 1 more minute or 30 more seconds and go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being with us here today for this third session of the Win-Win. See a few more people joining. Hope everybody's doing well. All right, the joins have slowed to a trickle, so I think that we are okay for continuing on. So Brian, if you want to advance our slides. So our disclosures, as we said, we run Teaching Physician. So, you know, that we have a lot of knowledge about what it's like and what you can use it for in terms of faculty development and performance improvement credit. Next slide. So here's our agenda. We're welcoming you. We're going to do a little bit of housekeeping that Brian will take you through in a few minutes. Many people may have been able to come to the last 2 sessions and the 7 steps to do a performance improvement project, but we'll do a brief overview and a review of those sessions and what those steps are to provide background around what we're going to accomplish today. We'll talk a little bit about the main goal for today, which is to cover kind of collection of post-faculty development data. We'll go through an example. We'll talk clearly about the steps that you need to submit your data to the ABFM for your preceptors. And then we'll spend a little bit of time and actually turn it over to you to hear about your experience offering faculty development and in data collection too. And then we'll have a few minutes at the end for homework and question and answer. And obviously we're not going to get back together after this session, so there's no way to check your homework. But if you've been following along this series and you complete the homework, then you will have offered your faculty a faculty development experience that would support performance improvement credit. So, next slide.
All right, so I'm going to take us through a little bit of our webinar housekeeping here. We are using Zoom webinar, so you may be familiar with many of the controls already, but I wanted to first direct your attention to the chat feature. You may notice when you use the chat feature that you can target the panelists, myself and Amanda, or you can do a general widespread comment to everybody. You are welcome to use that. Just be aware of where you're targeting. We also have a Q&A feature that's been activated, and that's the best way to get our attention in the midst of a topic. So if you use that Q&A area, we can go ahead and periodically jump in there and answer your questions. If you have any tech support questions, or if you've run into things on Teaching Physician that you're just dying to know, feel free to drop that down into the chat, and I can try to answer that as we go along. I'll basically be in the background here answering questions, dropping in some links and so on as Amanda's talking. So that is our housekeeping. Oh, one last thing, some helpful links here on the screen, obviously teachingphysician.org, but also the stfm.org/ABFM PI Toolkit is where you're going to find a lot of these resources that we're talking about. So there we go.
All right, so at this time, we'd like to invite all of you, if you want to just get to know who's in the webinar with you, since you can't see each other, just to put your name and your institution in the chat so we can know where folks are coming from. So we'll take a minute or 2 to do that, just to introduce yourself and what institution you're part of. So we have some folks from Ohio, Arkansas, North Carolina, another folk from Arkansas, someone from the Texas Academy of Family Physicians, welcome. All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves and letting us know where you're from. Okay, Brian, can we have the next slide? Oh, and someone from Pennsylvania as well. Welcome. All right, our goals for today and this session. So we'd like to talk about how you can use Teaching Physician to collect post-development self-assessment data from community faculty, which is one of the important things you'll need for the ABFM continuing certification credit. We'll describe the steps to submit the data to the ABFM so that your preceptors and your community faculty can get their credit. And then we'll take a little bit of time just to evaluate your own experience about providing competency-based community faculty development using Teaching Physician resources and working with your faculty. So hopefully we'll get all of those goals accomplished today. Next slide. So our first thing that we're going to do is just briefly go through the 7 steps that you need to cover to be able to successfully implement and put in data for this performance improvement project. And we'll also go through the basics of the last 2 sessions. So this is, if you've been here before, you've seen this. I think it's a good reminder because it's been a couple months since we've seen each other. So from start to finish, what does everybody need to do to be able to give their preceptors and their community faculty performance improvement credit? Well, you need to first, as an institution, register with the ABFM. And when you register with the ABFM, you're basically saying you are going to keep records that they can audit if needed. You have some sort of way of managing a portfolio. So either you or a staff member or someone who works at your institution can manage a portfolio for the community faculty that are going to be participating in this experience. And that you'll need to be able to track participation of your faculty and completion of their projects and kind of achievement of their goals. After you're done with that, you need to make sure that the community faculty that are part of your performance improvement project are actually eligible for participation. So they'll need to attest, and you will need to attest to that they're in a teaching setting. They will need to teach 180 hours over 3 years. So this was a little bit of a point of confusion early on because we just had the 180 hour number, but each phase of kind of continuing certification is 3 years. The 180 hours needs to happen over a 3-year period of time. They need to participate in the intervention, including the education that you offer to them. They need to review pre-post data, and largely that's their own pre-post data, but they need to be able to see, did their intervention make a difference? Did it improve their practice? And they need to be available to collaborate with you and with others as needed. The third step is that there needs to be some sort of pre-development assessment. And we went through with the self-assessment that's available in Teaching Physician that really uses competency-based a competency-based framework to see where community faculty are in terms of their teaching skills. And another potential assessment is the sponsoring institution could assess how the teaching physician is doing. So we covered that in session 1. So steps 4 and 5 we covered in session 2. So we talked about how can you use resources that are on Teaching Physician to design a faculty development experience, especially regarding kind of helping community faculty achieve the next level of competency in their teaching. The intervention needs to be really clear in terms of what you're offering your community faculty. So it could be, an educational session, it could be some self-directed readings, but you need to have an intervention that you can clearly describe. And then your institution needs to have an aim for this intervention. And we talked a little about what the aim statement should look like, and we'll review that again later. And then you need to deliver your faculty development experience. And in this time of Zoom and pandemic, we talked about options for live, for online, and for self-directed faculty development. So this was for session 2. So next slide. So today we're really going to focus on, after you have done your development, you need to do a post-assessment. And we'll talk about how you can use the self-assessment via Teaching Physician to compare the performance of your preceptors and your community faculty before your intervention and after your intervention. Another potential type of assessment that you could get to do kind of a post-development assessment is your sponsoring institution, so your faculty evaluating the teaching physician. And you can also look at learner assessments or learner evaluations as a potential post-assessment for the intervention that you did. And then finally, you need to notify the ABFM that the community faculty have completed the performance improvement activity. And like I said, we'll go through step-by-steps about how you do that. Next slide. So this is just a little bit of like what we reviewed in sessions 1 and in the homework. So we talked about steps 1 through 3. In the first session, we talked about ABFM performance improvement credit in general. We talked about the community faculty competencies, and we introduced you to the teaching physician self-assessment tools. And there was some homework that would help you achieve those first 3 steps. So next slide. In session 2, we talked about using those self-assessment tools to collect pre-development data. We talked about 6 steps to create a faculty development experience. We talked about ABFM requirements in terms of institutional aims and SMART goals or individual aims. And then we went through 3 different scenarios for a faculty development experience, because we know that different institutions have different types of faculty that they have, and you have different things that you need to do to help them develop as teachers. And so we talked about, what if most of your faculty just need to get to the next competency level for an area of teaching? What if your faculty come to you at kind of very different competency levels? How do you handle that? And then what if you just have faculty that are new to teaching? So today we're going to continue using that example of if you have faculty member at different levels coming to your faculty development experience, because this is commonly what many people encounter. It's a little bit more unusual to have people that all need to kind of the same thing if you have a mix of people that have been teaching for a while and new teachers. So the homework that was for the previous session was around kind of figuring out your topic, writing your institutional aim, using teaching physician content and institutional content to deploy your faculty development, working with your faculty to make their own SMART goals and aims, and then thinking about how you would evaluate if you reached the institutional aim. And that's really our focus for today, is operationalizing that evaluation component. So next slide. So our focus today, as I said, we're going to talk about that step 6, how do you perform that post-assessment data collection? And then we're going to talk again about step 7, which is how do you notify the ABFM of completion of the performance improvement activity. Next slide. So we're going to pivot now to collection of the post-development data, and we're going to talk about one of the examples in terms of faculty being at different levels and how would you go about collecting information that supports performance improvement completion. Next slide. So what does the ABFM require? So again, the ABFM requires that you, as the sponsoring institution, have an institutional aim, and we'll give an example and talk about the potential intervention you could have used. So you need to have that clear for yourself to know what was your goal when you set out doing this faculty development. When you had your intervention, what were you hoping to accomplish? You need to be able to compare how were things before your intervention and how were things after your intervention. So you need to have data sources that look at how people were doing before and after the faculty development. And then the ABFM requires individual faculty to be kind of an active participant in this and to collaborate in the project. And so they should each have a SMART goal or an aim around how are they actively improving their practice as a teacher. And it will be different person to person. Now, even though this is what they require to meet the kind of goals of this program, you are not, to be clear, going to be submitting all of this to the ABFM. This goes back to that part around record keeping and confirmation of participation. So you need to collect this information, but you're not going to be entering this into any sort of database in ABFM. We'll talk specifically about what the ABFM wants. But you do need to have this information that is in an auditable record. So if the ABFM comes to you and says, hey, Dr. X, what did Dr. X do? You need to be able to say, well, Dr. X set this goal, and here was, how Dr. X achieved that or did not achieve that after the intervention. Next slide. Brian, did you hear me?
I did not hear you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Next slide. All right. So we are going to give some examples of how you can use teaching physician to collect post-development self-assessment data from community faculty. And this will look kind of familiar because the form is the same in terms of what you use to collect the self-assessment data. So using the teaching physician forms does 2 things. So first of all, it allows you to collect that, or it allows you to complete that step 6 that you need to be able to report to the ABFM. And then it also, if you're using the self-assessment form from Teaching Physician, it's the same form. It's their self-assessment on where they are with competency, their competency level. And so it very clearly allows you to compare how are they doing before the intervention and how are they doing after the intervention, because it's the same information that they're reporting back for you. So it's going to be very easy to see how people change and if they're meeting their goals. So we're going to go clearly through how we collect the data, but there's kind of two ways that you can do this. Probably the easiest way is to actually request an identified PDF from the community faculty member after they've filled it out. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who will go through the next slide to talk about how you can do this with your faculty.
Excellent, thank you. So this is an example of what the self-assessment PDF looks like. So let me explain briefly how someone would get this. On Teaching Physician, at the upper right of the website, there's a link for the self-assessment tool. So your preceptors or community faculty would have gone to that link and filled out the self-assessment. Once they're finished and they run the report, they're taken to a web page and they can save or bookmark that link to the results, and they can also download a PDF. Now, the beautiful thing about the system is that that link that's generated is permanent. So we're not going to purge those self-assessments. If they bookmark that link, rename it in Chrome with their own name, they can share that link with you, and you can then have a record of their self-assessment on a particular date. If they decide to download a PDF, they can print it out, turn it into you, or they can just send you the file. The best way to identify that file is just to have them change the file name. So the file name is generally, that's generated is full of random numbers and digits that identifies your community faculty. But it's generally anonymous. So have them just simply rename that file with their own and send it to you. The PDF report that you're seeing on your screen here will show you the 5 different domains and where the greatest need is for that community faculty. You can see here, for example, teacher and environment. The grid at the top will show you exactly where they identified themselves. It's 5 columns left to right. They know very little about the topic is going to be that first column. So you can see where it says clinical team role. There's a check next to that. This community faculty member doesn't know much about clinical team roles. You can use multiple assessments that you receive to compare if a community faculty has determined that they improved or not within a particular competency. If they did this self-assessment in June of 2020, you would also maybe have them do one in June of 2021, and then you can compare the PDF side by side and look at those grids to see if those check marks improved. Down underneath that, you can see that this is where we provide guidance to a community faculty member about where to go on Teaching Physician with regards to a particular step. So these parts are relatively simple to self-identify, but just remember that they are anonymous when they're first generated. So you might have to give an instruction or two to a community faculty member.
Thanks. And I think, you know, kind of the beauty of this tool is you can really see how an individual community faculty member is changing over time. This is, like Brian said, something that's permanent. So you can see if someone starts off with you, you know, if they go to a couple different faculty development sessions, if they do several interventions, you can see, you know, for this individual person, maybe they didn't know a lot about the clinical team role. They went to a faculty development session or they undertook some self-study and then felt like they were able to achieve their goal of knowing more about that or being able to articulate what the clinical team role is for, then you would be able to kind of monitor their progression of their competency over time. And this again is kind of one piece of information that could go in that portfolio that the ABFM requires as part of being a sponsor. So this would go into that, that community faculty member's portfolio. So in terms of your record keeping, this would be kind of an indication of how they're doing. We will pause here because this I think is an important thing to know and understand. And if anyone has any questions, we'll take any questions if folks have them right now. Give you a couple seconds if you want to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. I guess we have been exceptionally clear in what we've explained. So if questions come up, please let us know. Oh, wait, I spoke too soon. There is a question. Have other boards accepted these faculty development activities for part of the portfolio for maintenance of certification? So ABIM, ABMS. Would like to use this for community faculty on different rotations. My understanding is no, that we are the first board that has accepted this as a performance improvement project, although that might have changed over the past couple months. So we can look into that and get back to you and let you know if there are any other boards that are accepting this sort of work for performance improvement or for maintenance of certification credit. So we'll figure that out. And then Brian, we have a list of attendees, right? So we can just email all attendees to let them know.
Absolutely.
Okay. But great question. I think one thing to know is, as you probably noticed, that there's nothing particularly family medicine about these, the teaching physician content. It's designed to be good for any sort of community-based faculty or teaching physician preceptor that you may have. So hopefully it would, one day other boards would be able to accept this as well, because I think it is definitely helpful to support your community faculty in maintaining their boards for work that they're pretty much already doing. All right, next slide. All right, I talked a little bit about aims and SMART goals, and this is a review from our past session, but I just want to be really clear about what you're trying to answer in this post-development assessment and what kind of records you need to keep in order to complete the performance improvement project. So the first thing is to know, what is the institutional aim? And as I said, this is really your goal, what the sponsoring institution is hoping to do with its intervention, with its faculty development experience. And it needs to answer three questions. So how good do you want it to be? For whom and by when? And we'll go through an example. But you all need to have an institutional aim as the sponsoring organization around what you're hoping to do with your intervention and with your faculty development experience. The second is to know about SMART goals. I'm sure most folks are familiar with these, but this will allow the individual faculty member to set a personal goal. Remember that part about collaboration and what they've learned from the projects. They really need to set a personal goal that reflects kind of the institutional aim and is aligned with the institutional aim. And so the SMART mnemonic can help the faculty member to remember that the goal needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. If that's too many letters for somebody to do, which maybe people are just not feeling up for a SMART goal that day, they can also just write a personal aim, which again, an aim statement has those three components: how good, for whom, and by when. What would their personal aim be? And it should, again, be what the faculty member hopes they will accomplish in their teaching after they've been part of the faculty development experience or intervention. Next slide. All right, so we talked about the teaching physician self-assessment and how you can do it pre and post, but there's other kinds of post-development data that you could collect that might go into your records and into your portfolio for the ABFM. So you could look at learner evaluations or learner reflections on the preceptor's teaching. You could have the community faculty or preceptor do their own self-reflections, and they don't necessarily have to turn it into you, but they could do those as part of a post-development data collection. And then you, as the course or clerkship director, if you have evaluations of them and their teaching, that could also be some data that goes into deciding, did you achieve your institutional aim? Has your experience been effective? Next slide. Oh, go back. Thank you. And then I think it's really important because, we're throwing out a lot of potential data that you could collect. I think it's really important to think about, what are you really trying to answer in the post-development data? What are you trying to prove? And really the thing that you want to be able to say after you're done with this is, did your faculty development experience, did the intervention that you have, did it meet that institutional aim that you wrote? Did you achieve it? If so, why? Why not? And if you did not, like, are there other things that you need to do? The ABFM doesn't say you have to achieve your aim. They just have to say that you need to try. So the data that you collect should be able to answer that question if you achieved your institutional aim. The other thing that you're trying to help your faculty do is figure out if they achieved their own individual SMART goals or individual aims, because that is, again, part of some of the paperwork that they'll submit to you to be part of this project. So you need to have whatever data sources you're using be able to support answering these two questions. Next slide. So we're going to walk through the process with an example. And as I said before, this is the example of if you had a faculty development experience or intervention where you had community faculty at all different levels. So we're going to talk about how you can use teaching physician and other sources of data to support that kind of experience and to be able to then submit data to the ABFM. So you have identified that you have faculty that are very different competency levels. You know this from self-assessment data form when you did a snapshot in the past. If you want to get the snapshot of where your faculty are, you can email Brian and he can send you your institutional snapshot to see where people are. And so you've decided to hold a faculty development session that's going to try to help everybody get to the next competency level. So next slide. So if you were at one of our first two sessions, this should look familiar to you. This is one of the list of the community faculty competencies. And again, it's meant as kind of a continuum. And we hope that most community faculty end up in kind of the second category, that's the goal, but that some other people might be more interested in a certain type of teaching competency, and then they might be further over to the right of the continuum. But at this point, we're saying your hypothetical institution has decided, you know, your faculty really need some development around knowing the difference between formative feedback and summative evaluation, and then how do you use formative feedback to create a summative evaluation. So this is what you have determined is important for your community faculty. And then when you looked at your snapshot, it turns out people are all over the place. Some people don't even know what those words mean. Some people, you know, feel like they're doing pretty well and know how to use the formative feedback and talk with the learner about making the summative evaluation based on the formative feedback. So again, your learners are all over the place. Next slide. So you review the corresponding teaching physician page for content and references to support your activity. And then you need to write an institutional aim statement. And so this was the example that we gave at the last session. So in 3 months or 6 months, whatever your time period is, 90% of the faculty attending the development will meet their personal aim or SMART goal that demonstrates next level competency for student evaluation. So say you started off and you had no idea what those words meant. The goal would be that after 3 months, after they've had the experience, they've had a chance to go back and work with their learners, that then the next time the preceptor or the community faculty does the self-assessment data, that then they say, oh, I know the difference between these two things. I'm able to identify it. You would create a session. We gave the example of a jigsaw session to kind of have people at the same level talk about what they do and then mix up learners of different levels so that you could do some near peer teaching. We suggested that maybe at the end you would want to do a mini didactic just to make sure everybody got the key take-home points and they knew what their next steps were. And then your attendees would want to write their own SMART goals or personal aim statements, and it would be a good idea to collect these or have some way of tracking them over time. Again, this is part of that portfolio, the auditable records that you need to be keeping. And then you would need to create a plan to collect data to evaluate, did the faculty development meet your aim, the next level competency for student evaluation, and did it meet individual aims? So you would have thought about what your data collection plan is going to be. So next slide. So if this is the aim, which is that 90% of the people attending will meet their personal aim SMART goal that demonstrates next level competency for student evaluation, what kind of data can you track that supports achievement of this aim? And we would say a pretty easy way to do this is just to have them do the self-assessment from teaching physician again. And you would just look at, you know, how many people were in that first level versus the third level versus the fourth level. And ideally, after you've done this and you've given your faculty some supports and some ideas on how to think about student evaluation, that after they've had the intervention and they've had the education and they've had a chance to go back and work with learners, that more of them would then report on their self-assessment, hey, I made it to this next level. I know what to do, and I've implemented that, and now I'm rating my competency level for this area higher than it was before. And so you would be able to look and see, did 90% of the folks that went to your faculty development experience or got your intervention, did they actually move up or did they not? And again, the ABFM is not grading you to see, did you actually meet this aim? Maybe this aim was too ambitious. Maybe 90% is too much. Maybe you're hoping to change the competency level of 50% of your faculty. Regardless, you need to be able to say, did you achieve it or did you not? And then what was the data that you actually found? So next slide. So that's for the institutional aim. And so that's pretty easy to collect, right? You'll have your pre-self-assessments. You'll see where everybody is on this continuum. If you look in the middle, this is where everyone's going to have rated themselves. So you're going to be able to see, did people start kind of down here, able to identify the difference, and then move up here? They're able to provide the learner with both formative feedback and summative evaluation. You're going to be able to know whether or not your faculty achieved that. Now, as an individual faculty member, I have a different aim, right? My aim is not the institutional one, which is to get everybody to the next level. My aim might be, all right, I have identified that, I know the difference between these two kinds of feedback and evaluation, but I really want to work on the one that's outlined in this box. I want to work on grounding my summative evaluation in my formative feedback. So I know that sometimes the formative feedback that I get, it doesn't make it in the summative evaluation, or sometimes when I'm using my when I'm creating my summative evaluation, I don't necessarily remember or recall my formative feedback. So I want to start to make this a little bit more integrated for my learner. And so this would be my own personal goal that I'm going to work on. So next slide. So I might write an evaluation, or not an evaluation, a personal aim that says, in 3 months, I will use formative feedback to create summative evaluation. So this is aligned with the institutional aim, but it's personal to me. And I would actually say I did kind of a bad job writing the same statement or making a SMART goal, because I didn't say how often I'm going to use this. Maybe the person hopes that they want to do it 100% of the time, or maybe they only have like one learner every 3 months, and so it's only going to be with 1 or 2 learners. But this is my goal, is to move myself up to this next level of competency. And so what data can I have, or can I collect, that shows that this SMART goal was achieved? Well, I can do self-reflection, or I could self-report to the sponsoring institution. Do I think I'm now using the formative feedback that I've given the student to create a summative evaluation? Another option might be to look at documentation of formative feedback and see, is that formative feedback, is that appearing in the summative evaluation that I'm submitting, right? Am I actually submitting summative evaluations that have some of the earlier things that I gave in my feedback? So that would be more of an objective way of measuring that. And then the other thing to know is that even though, there are these 3 ways that you can do it, and I'm sure there are other ideas that you all have around how would the individual person know if they achieved the SMART goal, the community faculty member doesn't actually have to submit all of this information. They need to submit an attestation that they've completed this work, and we're going to show you a sample attestation. And in fact, Brian, can I turn it over to you to share the sample attestation? So we'll include this link in the chat, but this is a sample attestation from the ABFM. And if you look down, Brian, I don't know if you can make it any bigger around the part of the physician attestation. All right, so it's, thank you, I appreciate it. So the individual physician must answer these questions, respond truthfully, and the answer needs to be that they've done this in order to receive the credit. So were they engaged in the planning and the execution of the project? So that doesn't mean, did they design the faculty development experience? That's not what they're asking. They're asking, did they then use what they learned at the faculty development to then go back and change their teaching? And then the answer is yes. Were they involved in the changes implemented during the project? They're the one writing their own aim statement or their goal. So yes, they'll be part of the changes that are implemented during the project. Were they regularly reviewing the data? In keeping with the project's management plan, they will be reviewing their own data. This is why having them do the self-assessment both pre and post allows them to meet this, this requirement. Did they participate in team meetings for the project? So that means, did they go to the faculty development experience? You know, if they needed to meet with someone from the sponsoring institution, did they do that? And then 5 is really where they get to talk about their own SMART goals, their own specific aims, any reflections, lessons learned, that sort of thing. That's where this individual data is gathered. So again, you don't need to be inputting all of this data, but you do need to have some sort of attestation to know that your physicians, your community physicians have done all of these 5 things. So we can go back to the slide. And again, we'll send this link out to everybody who's here today. All right. And then to be clear, the data that you submit to the ABFM, again, you're not submitting SMART goals, you're not submitting your institutional aims, that sort of thing. You need to keep records of this, but you're not going to be submitting that. You are basically saying that the individual physicians that were part of this project, you are certifying that they have completed the project. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are the key components. So next slide. So the data that you submitted is actually pretty mundane. You need the person's board ID. You need their first and last name and their email address. You need to indicate the start date that the physician started participating in the project. So usually that's when they're signing up to participate in this, or when they enroll in the faculty development experience or intervention that you're going to be offering for them. It's important to know that that date can't be before they started to precept. So they have to be a preceptor already as part of your institution. Then they need to sign up for this project. So you can't do the project before you start precepting, because remember, you need to attest that you're doing teaching, you're in a teaching setting and you're doing 180 hours over 3 years. You need to include the end date. So when was it that you said you were going to collect the individual data or get information back from your preceptors around if you met your institutional aim? So what I would say is probably the start date, and the end date maybe when people first sign up and submit their pre-teaching physician self-assessment, and then the end date may be, you know, when they are done with the intervention and they've had some time to implement what they've learned in the teaching setting, and then they've submitted their post-intervention self-assessment data. And you really feel like you're done with the project and you've been able to look to see, have people moved up in their competency level. And then there's something called an instance ID. You don't have to do anything about that. The ABFM calculates that itself. But this is the data that you're going to submit in a spreadsheet to the ABFM. Next slide.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is...
Oh, I didn't move the slide.
Oh, it didn't go?
Didn't go.
Can you see that now? Let me try a new share here momentarily. My apologies. All right. Amanda, can you see the submitting the precepting physician completion report slide? I was notified that I was having some unstable internet, so that could be what's going on here. Is my face moving? I think. That's good. Okay. What you should be seeing is the page.
Right. I'll share.
You can share? Okay, you share and then I'll talk.
Can folks see that?
I can see that.
Okay. Go ahead. You can go ahead.
All right. So what we're looking at here is the dashboard that you're going to use for submitting the data. So the link there at the bottom, theabfm.org/performance improvement/precepting is where you're going to head. You'll log in using your institutional login. You won't be using a personal login to submit this data. Once you've logged in, you're going to head over to the dashboard, and where you see create an application, you're going to head down to about the middle there, and you'll see precepting PI program. And that's where you're going to begin.
All right. So that is how you submit the data to the ABFM. Again, you need kind of basic pieces of information that you're submitting to them, although you need to be able to collect a larger amount of data in the portfolio and in the form of audible records to make sure that your preceptors have achieved their goals and aims and you have worked towards achieving your institutional aim. So now we're going to pivot for the last few minutes about evaluating your faculty development experience, and to think about, once you've offered your intervention or offered your experience, how can you make it better the next time? So if folks remember from last time, these were kind of the 6 steps that you need to go through to create a faculty development experience. We talked about the first 5 steps. And the last one is really to consider evaluation and feedback. And so we're going to talk about 3 big areas that you might want to consider once you've done your faculty development experience and how you might use those in the future. And then we want to open it up to hear from you all as well. So in terms of evaluation and feedback, after you have done your faculty development, you should do some sort of formal faculty development evaluation. And this can be via Likert scales or short answer responses in a survey. And as you're reviewing the data, you should figure out, what did people like about it? What worked well? What did they feel was effective in terms of the teaching and the learning? And also, what changes did they recommend? Maybe the format didn't work. Maybe you thought that a lot of people were kind of on a higher competency level, but they were really on a lower competency level and they were kind of confused. What changes did your attendees recommend if you offer it again? And then you want to think about, as you're submitting your data and kind of wrapping up your project, beyond the faculty development experience itself, how many of your community faculty members actually achieved their personal SMART goal or aim? And, I would hope that many of them would be able to achieve their own personal goals and aims and improve their teaching as part of this performance improvement project. But maybe there were barriers to their success and they weren't able to actually say, I feel like I'm at the next level of competency, or I feel like I've achieved this goal. And so identifying barriers to their success is going to be pretty important, because that will also help you think about, what other kinds of faculty development might you offer, or what other supports do you need to offer your community faculty so they can be doing an excellent job teaching your students, learners, and trainees. In addition, you also want to learn about what were facilitators of their success, because once you know what's helping one community faculty member be successful in improving their teaching, then that might be information that's useful for other community faculty. And I've seen this work really well at community faculty development, where people shared, here's 3 things that I do around feedback that's really important. And, more junior, earlier career faculty were like, oh, these are great ideas. I'm gonna do them. Or some people said, you know what, hey, I'm not gonna have time for that. Do people have other ideas? So kind of getting a sense of what works and what doesn't is going to be important, because then you're going to be able to use that information and share it with other community faculty who may be encountering similar challenges. And then the other sort of evaluation piece that you need to think about is, did you actually achieve your institutional aim? You wrote that aim statement, and then hopefully you were able to collect data that indicated whether or not you achieved it. Did you? Why or why not? Maybe you wrote that you wanted 100% of people to do something and that just wasn't realistic. Or maybe you said that you wanted people to be able to get to the next competency level, but the materials that you had available or the stages that your learners were at it wasn't appropriate to go to that next level. Or maybe there were other kinds of institutional barriers that were going on that made it so that you couldn't achieve that aim. It's important to know kind of what's within your realm of control and what's outside of your realm of control. And then to think about, if there were barriers within your area that you can control and that you can influence, how you might go about affecting change for that. So these are, 3 kind of main areas that you will want to consider once you've done your faculty development experience, done your intervention, in terms of thinking about how can you use the feedback to make it better for people in the future. Next slide. I'm sorry, I'm doing the slides. I don't know, I should tell myself to do the next slides. So we actually want to stop now. And if people have done their faculty development experiences or have done their interventions, we want to hear about how things are going. So I'm going to actually stop sharing. And if anybody is willing to kind of raise their hand, we can allow you to speak if you want to share with the group about how things are going. Who's had an experience with this that might help others? And if no one's had an experience with it, that's fine. We can move on too. We just wanted to use the wisdom of the group as well. So if anybody's willing to share what they have done thus far. You can either chat or you can raise your hand. All right, maybe folks are feeling shy or quiet. We will finish up our presentation and then we will answer any questions you have. All right, so homework, if you've been following along with this session of 3 webinars, you know at the end we give homework. Again, obviously we're not having a 4th webinar, so we won't be able to check in with you about how things are going. But your homework now is to perform that post-development assessment, gather your data, to submit your data and information to the ABFM, to evaluate the success of your faculty development experience, and then to remember that you can repeat this often. So community faculty can get this type of credit every 3 years. And it's unlikely you're going to get 100% of your faculty every single time you offer a development or an experience or an intervention. So it might be that you offer one thing, you know, over the first half of the year, and then you offer another thing over the second half of the year. So offering repeated experiences for faculty that may be able to attend at different times will also make sure that you are doing what you can to help your faculty get this extra credit for the work that they're doing teaching our learners and our trainees. And that hopefully the kind of reflection that you do, the evaluation that you do of your faculty development experience helps inform the next iteration so that it's more useful, it's better, and is achieving institutional goals and aims in addition to supporting your preceptors and your community faculty to meet their own improvement goals and aims. So with that, we'll turn it over to question and answer. I want to thank everybody for coming to today's webinar. As a reminder, here are some important links. We will also put the link to the attestation in the chat too. And once we have figured out if it is possible to get the credit with different, oh, maybe Brian already has some late breaking news with that.
Yeah, so I reached out to a colleague who worked on this project with the ABFM and asked her if any other boards had approved this. And at this time, no other boards have.
Okay, so for people that have preceptors that are in internal medicine peds, other boards, encourage them to put pressure on their board. I think that for us, it was actually, I think what convinced our board to do it was hearing from individual community faculty and individual preceptors that this would be important. So, but thank you, Brian, for answering that question. And Brian's placed the attestation link in the chat. And we'll take any additional questions if you all have them. All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions, but if you think of one after you're done with your time here, feel free to email us and we're happy to answer them. Thanks for spending this 50 minutes with us today. Hope everybody has a great day and that you're able to use the tools that we talked about today to get your community faculty performance improvement credit to maintain their certification. Thanks, everybody.